We've seen teams work on a game for 11 months in a dingy office with the rock bottom rent, doing, some contracting to be able to kind of, pay some meager salary to people that have, quit their jobs and kind of left for the dream of a startup. And in the end, this team managed to get funding. And I think a big part of the reason that they got funding was that the investors that they'd been talking to for such a long time were so impressed by their drive and their resilience. You could see the fire in their eyes every time you spoke to them, to the point where it was, well, if no one is going to give them money, we should just give them money. This game needs to be made. This team needs to do it.
Welcome to the Rise and Play podcast. I am Sophie Vaux, your host and leadership coach. In the show, my wonderful co-host and I sit down with influential and diverse leaders from the gaming industry to hear about their leadership journey. Not the well-polished stories, but the real stories, the up and down, the breakthrough, and the failures. Or should we rather say learnings? Each episode will transport you into a magical space of vulnerability with our guests. And together, you'll be reminded that no matter how hard it is, you are not alone in this journey, and find the courage to keep going. Come and join the ride. Let's begin. As a former product leader who worked 16 years in the gaming industry, I know how difficult it is to get reliable and usable player insights. The logistics of scheduling, recruiting the right players, collecting and reviewing feedback, it is all time away from game development. But you know how fundamental it is to test assumptions with your core audience and iterate at a lower cost before marketing an unproven game. I am proud to announce Playtest Cloud as our key partner, as I have believed since day one in the quality of your service and their mission to democratize player research. Playtest Cloud can take the hassle out of organizing game research yourself and delivers results within 48 hours, allowing you to implement changes in time for your release. Having been a long-time user of the platform, it is the industry standard used by top AAA and mobile studios, and now they also support indie developers with special pricing. Working for a year on the wrong game is an expensive mistake, and you can de-risk it now by investing in your player research. Check out the show notes for a free trial and learn more about Playtest Cloud. So welcome to a new episode of Rise and Play. And today I'm very pleased, excited to have Lína on the podcast. We've recently connected at PGC London, so it's nice to meet in person. And I was remembering, how did we connect? Well, first of all, I must say, women in games, in leadership in games, we know of each other because it's not like we are millions of us. And then in investment, more rare. So with Lína, we connected actually a few years ago. And thanks to another amazing woman, Isabelle, who is the co-CEO at Klein Games, connected us. And since then, we've connected a few times. And here we are, of course, recording a podcast. Lína has 15 years of experience in game development and played a pivotal role in shaping some of the industry's most renowned projects, working at big studios such as CCP in Iceland, Ubisoft, Massive, and EA DICE in Sweden, where she led the Star Wars Battlefront franchise, and later continued at EA Sports in Vancouver, so moving to several places, traveling the world, where she guided also the strategy for the globally successful FIFA series, so big franchise from 2010 to 2020. And with the last stop was at Bonfire Studio in California and contributing to the very recently announced game Archeron. So today, Lína is a founding partner at Behold Ventures, a venture capital fund investing in early-stage game industry companies across the Nordics and Europe. And we get straight into that today, the episode to cover what it is, how to get into investment funding and so on. But welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. And I realized I haven't spelled your last name. I don't want to misspell it. Your full name is Lína Sigurlína
Ingvarsdóttir.
Ingvarsdóttir. So maybe I played it safe by not trying to spell it, but it will be in the show notes. But I wanted also to honor your last name as well fully and not calling you the familiar name, Lína. So let's begin maybe before getting into the origin story of Behold Venture. Given your amazing track record, working production, development on big franchises, AAA games, what have you enjoyed the most in your career, in games that was really a theme? And then maybe could be the link on what led to Behold Venture. I'm quite curious about the line, if there's any, for your career.
There have been many moments that I've enjoyed in my career, and I feel like there have been moments where I've been going to work. I mean, I remember when I was working at DICE in Stockholm, and I was actually working on Mirror's Edge Catalyst, which was the game that I worked on before Star Wars Battlefront. Going to the office, and I was thinking about what I was doing. I was doing a lot of research into kind of super sort of autocratic societies, oppressive societies. And I was just thinking like, I'm building a world. That's what we're doing. We're creating a world that players inhabit. And I was just pinching myself in the arm that, that's what I get to do for my job. And then after Sarah Jansson, who was another amazing woman in games leadership, came back from her maternity leave and she took Mirror's Edge Catalyst over again, I was lucky enough to be picked to start up and run the Star Wars Battlefront franchise. And doing that was an absolute adventure. I mean, I've always been a fan of Star Wars. The fact that it was a franchise that I really enjoyed was another thing. But I've always really appreciated that, during my career in video games have gone from being sort of a hobby for nerds over to being the biggest global entertainment medium. Experiencing that transition both as a consumer but also as a professional, and then understanding the threads of creativity, technology, entertainment, and business that go into making video games. I studied industrial engineering. I've always loved complex processes, and to kind of work on the interaction of creativity and technology and art and science, I thought was absolutely amazing. And being able to do that on franchises like Star Wars being one, but then EA Sports FIFA being the other, and just understanding the impact that these franchises have on people across the world. But then also to understand how strategy is what underpins everything. And for me, that's the kind of the connection back to, now being a venture capitalist is understanding, being able to use my intuition and understanding of the world to predict where it's going, but also to put money into things that I want to see more of. The more experience I got, the more I understood like the big picture. And now I feel like the big picture is kind of where I like to play. And I think that's a nice way to looking at venture capital, because you can look at it from the purely monetary perspective. And it's about, placing bets and wanting to become wealthy or make money. And yes, there's an aspect of it that's that, but it's also the how can I be a part of impacting trends, enabling companies and enabling the things that I want to see more of in the world.
This is very inspiring, and you talk about it in such a pure clarity. This is really impressive. I just wanted to acknowledge that, because it's hard to look back on your whole life and think, okay, what is the common, traits? Yeah, the way you just explain it is rare. I wanted to acknowledge that. And also something that I haven't heard that often or at all is what you just shared in your approach to what is the impact that being a VC can actually help beyond just the money. Because this is something I have myself also in the industry, having seen the trends the past years. There's been a bigger focus on, the return and all this. I mean, it's also amplified by the press, but it's also very refreshing to hear the thesis, the principle, the philosophy behind what led to create at least Behold for your approach. And we get to that. So with that love for, complexity, debunking that, predicting, sensing, you talked about intuition, which I love, because in the end, I mean, no one is here, with a calculation and prediction. We are all trying to predict some trends, some movement of the future, and applying that to another impact level, which is VC. What was the moment of transition where, okay, you could have continued, in games and doing the strategy of another franchise, another studio, new studio, and then you took the route of venture capitalist, or at least on the investment side. So I'm very curious about the steps that led to that.
initially getting into games was a bit accident, and I feel like as someone who likes to think about strategy and be very strategic, a lot of the shifts and kind of twists and turns in my own career have not been very strategic. They've been very, very opportunistic. And I like to be, ready to grab opportunities when they present themselves. And I'm not afraid to take risks. I'm Icelandic. I'd had the opportunity to move to Sweden. I'd moved from Sweden to Canada. I'd moved from Canada to California. And when I was living in the US is when COVID hit. And when that happened, after a few months being in lockdown in California, my family and I decided that we would go back to Iceland temporarily. Given that Iceland is an island, it had very good control of the borders. It was able to contain COVID for the longest time in a very reasonable manner. And I realized once I'd been back home for a few weeks that I didn't want to go back to the US. I wanted to stay because I had been away for almost 10 years and it felt good to be back. But then I didn't really have a job. Iceland has a nice game industry, but it is quite small. And I don't generally like to go back. So I didn't want to go back to CCP where I started my career. And what happened was that a good friend of mine who was running an Icelandic venture fund, and a venture fund that does not invest in games at all, but in social impact companies, she asked me if I would join the board of that fund. And because of that, I actually started to take on some other projects for the investment company that had that fund. So I got very familiar with investments and evaluations and the DD process of going through, evaluating investment, but in a completely different environment and also at a much later stage than the seed investments that we do at Behold. And this felt very random. I mean, if she hadn't gotten that job and I hadn't been just moving back home at the time, it was very sort of, time and location specific as an opportunity, but it came up and one thing led to another. I spent 2 years consulting for that company and also trying to figure out what I wanted to do next because I wasn't, I'd been a games producer for 15 years. I'd done a lot of different things, but I kind of felt like, game production was over for me, but I still wanted to be engaged with games. And, as you do, I started sort of checking in with my network and, evaluated a few different roles at different companies. I knew that I wanted to be based in Iceland. I caught up with my old boss from DICE, KM Troedsson, and he's been doing angel investing in games very successfully since he left EA in 2016. And he had the idea that he wanted to set up a VC fund. So we got to talking and then he asked me if I wanted to join him in founding Behold Ventures. And so we did. We are 3 partners and a principal, and we've so far invested in about 18 companies. So all of a sudden, I am a venture capitalist, and it feels really strange for someone like me to have a capitalist as a part of my job titles.
Yeah, maybe this is a time to redefine what it is to be a capitalist. I remember at the dinner when you're not the typical capitalist that I meet at the table. So it's, again, refreshing. Maybe it's time to redefine our stereotype of what it is. And that's why, as well, I'm very glad to have you here on board to offer a bit of different perspective of, if we go through the semantics of what is really the system of funding and then the way to do it, then we can start to zoom out and see a bit more different ways. And I really love your approach. You seem really true to yourself. That's something I want to say, like from what I hear of the story, it's like you trust yourself and you go where it has to take you. And here you are, without overthinking it. Do I want to be a capitalist or not? It doesn't matter, the definition, but you are doing the work that makes sense to you, feels true, and to your purpose. And you seem very clear about that. So all is good, whatever definition we want to give it. Going back then to the start of Behold, what was the context at that time? What was the investment space in gaming at that time? Did we have many other funds and VCs involved? Which year was that? And what was your approach and thesis with Kay when you started?
Well, we started talking in probably late 2020, early 2021. At that time, the environment was still very booming. There was a lot of capital around, there was a lot of investment. The thesis for Behold Ventures was that we are very early stage and we're focused on the Nordics, although we will invest also more broadly in Europe. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that we are based in the Nordics, KM and I. We worked in the Nordics and we have great networks here, from a deal flow perspective and from the perspective of being able to evaluate founders, that this is our home turf. But I mean, obviously also, or I say obviously, but I mean, the Nordics have been an incredible hotspot of amazing games. So as a region, I think it definitely punches far above its weight. I mean, we can look to Finland for an incredibly strong mobile development background, but also very, very prominent AAA studios as well. But then you can also look at Sweden, and it's a hotbed of innovation, whether you talk about, AAA console, kids genres, or very sort of mature genres. I mean, we can talk about so many different success stories from Sweden and from the Nordics. And I think from that perspective, we are incredibly well placed, but also there aren't that many venture funds that are very active in the Nordic region. There's one in Finland called Sisu, whom we have often worked with, and they're good friends of ours. And other funds based outside of the regions have also been active, but they don't have the same footprint that we do. So it felt like a region in need of a game-specific VC, and it felt like with our background as developers, we could do a lot, both by using our experience to evaluate games and pitches, but also to leverage our network as advisors and supporters to these founders that we invest in.
I wonder, when you start, with the intention of a fund, you have the two channels that you need to take care of, right? So the fund available to invest, but also exactly the network of founders, the deal flow. So how did you start? Where did you start? Did you start in parallel? Maybe it depends on the fund, but at least in your specific case.
No, we actually started because we had the GP commit. So we started investing with our own money that we had put in the fund. And then the environment around us, in 2022, things started to shift. We had gotten aboard quite a lot of individuals from the games industry as LPs, as well as strategic. So we had, made significant progress in our fundraising. So we've been able to invest and kind of process our pipeline throughout. And in the beginning, obviously, we're a new fund. We had to get our name out there, had to build relationships, and that went quite well. And I think a lot of that has to do with, KM's track record as an angel investor. Having been doing that successfully for 6 or 7 years, he'd already both built great networks, but also a great reputation. I think, one of the reasons that it was pretty much a no-brainer for me to join him on this adventure, and our third partner, Magnus Kenneby. I mean, I used to work for Coam Dice. We worked together, and in an industry full of aggressive people, and there are definitely a lot of different characters in games. I mean, KM was a great boss and a really good colleague at EA after he ceased being my boss. So that's how people know him in the industry. And I think that hopefully evolved into Behold's brand as, people who are knowledgeable about games, who treat people well, and who really want to make a positive impact on the industry.
Yeah, you're onto something here, because it takes time to understand from a founder perspective what you might be looking for in a partner as an investor. And there was a wild wave in 2021 where, there was a very one-dimensional need around money and capital. And we see, the after wave of that 3-4 years later, where it's not enough to put just money. And so I have followed some of those founders, and I can see as well a bit the trauma where being able to trust, to rely on the partner, as an investor, what is the added value beyond just capital is also very essential for the business. And this is where I see, having walked in the shoes, of founders. So there's a level of empathy and understanding context and understanding the long-term game, because the return and expectation you can have from games, as you know, it's not a math formula, or at least that clear. and also the network that you can bring. So it's like I can see also how the relationship part is important on the side where you have the partners, but also with founders from your background. And also here for the listeners to consider as well, for them to ask themselves, what do you need, beyond capital? It's not just about money in the end to help succeed in this industry. Which leads me to a bit more, on your approach to the fund. As you said, like you're a small team, although you've done 18 investment and, also a good size of the fund. So yeah, what's your approach specifically as Behold? How do you support founder, work with them? And maybe what are the founders that work well with you based on your track record?
We have a very good process. I mean, we've been evolving and hitting our stride over these past 3 years, and we now also have a fantastic principal as a part of the fund whose name is Binni, who has had a lot of experience building analytics and insights teams in the industry. So he's very clued into the kind of analytics and the trends and where the industry is going, but also is a voracious player of games. So has an incredible breadth of knowledge about games. And so he complements the others on the Behold team. So there's 4 of us now, 3 of us in the investment team, and what we call the money guy, who's the experienced fund operator in the group. And I think that, what we're looking for and what we bring is I think, what we are looking for are people who have, the competence and the confidence and the capability to go the whole way or go through it. Because being a founder and running a startup, building a company, building a product, building a community for that product, I mean, these are some incredibly tough tasks. It takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of resilience. It takes a lot of luck. So, I mean, you can do everything correctly and, still not be successful based on the fact that, you weren't at the right place at the right time, or, your product didn't hit at the right time. So we're looking for people who have that kind of drive and stamina to be able to do that. We're looking for great games or great products or services, because we also invest in products, services, tools, and tech that supports our industry or the games. We're less interested in purely single player, as an example, and we're more interested in games that are multiplayers or have very social components. We're very interested in anything that is very creative and collaborative. But we're also interested in competitive. I mean, KM ran the Battlefield franchise for so many years. I've built shooters, built sports games. I've certainly built competitive games. And we can see what type of engagement that can drive. We have invested more in sort of PC and console, but we're also investing in mobile. We haven't really done a lot of investment in VR because we love the technology, but we are still waiting for the market to move in a significant enough manner. We haven't really done any significant investment in Web3/NFT slash anything blockchain based. There we've seen some games or some tech where it makes sense, but oftentimes it feels not very interesting for a gamer, and we're always coming at it from the sort of the player's perspective. I mean, we are developers who love games. We love to invest in teams where we can see that love and passion for the medium and the drive to make something super high quality that has the potential to kind of, punch through. I mean, I think that today the industry is really interesting. I mean, it's very crowded. All platforms feel very crowded. All platforms feel very mature. So trying to find the thing that really punches through, everyone is trying to do that. And I think we believe that by investing in founders that we believe have the chops to be able to build, have the resilience and the chops to build something of quality, we can bring a lot of perspective and experience from our own game making days, but also from our network. So I think that, as an investor, we bring more than money. We bring that perspective and that experience, so we're better able to support our teams. And we have have, when we started out, we said, okay, that's, this thesis will make us a preferred investor for game companies.
Mm. And I do want to confirm the reputation that you've built, because receiving also a good amount of deal flow per week I'm not as active as a fund, but I have been an angel investor active more the previous years. And everyone who has mentioned Behold, I wanted to say that, had an amazing interaction with one of you, Kim, or you, and really want to work with you. So there's something beyond, just I need capital, but I need a partner, someone who has my back, because it's a very tough journey. Myself working on the coaching side, seeing the emotional toll and being a support in that way. That's also what founders are looking for, beyond just the capital is, can we share a bit the burden, but we're understood, and we're trying to figure this out, especially in this context, which is difficult for many founders. There's a lot of what it feels like a dead end, is it more content? Is it that game? How do we pass the cost of user acquisition? So I'm curious as well, you are dealing with the same parameters, trying to make prediction. What are you going back to, which is the foundation of your thesis, even when there's so much noise in the market about what's not possible today, right? So for what you're willing to share, your intuition and sense of the future, what the world will need.
Thank you. I mean, I really appreciate the kind words regarding Behold. It's good to know that we are being appreciated for our approach. I think to your question about, what what our intuition is telling us, what it is, what we are looking for. I mean, I think that it is certainly we evaluate commercial potential in what we're doing. But I mean, if we only looked at that, we would probably only invest in free to play, given the sort of, the potential to really explode. I mean, we've invested in games that are going to be free to play, but we have certainly invested in premium as well, and more experimental business models. I think that our intuition is it is simple for us in that, I think that there needs to be something about the game and the product that we really like, that appeals to us as a player, or we can see appealing to a player. And I think that we have invested in games that I think have the potential to be super broad and appreciated by a very broad audience. But we've also invested in games that, I think are going to be quite niche for the first game, where we believe that the studio is building a franchise that's going to build a reputation over several iterations of a game, and that has a potential that's going to be slower to unlock, but it is definitely going to be there. And I think that the element that always kind of at the end, I think, pays off is when we see resilience and we see the drive of the idea bringing the team. We've seen teams, and I think that's perhaps the benefit of the hard times that the industry has seen over the past 2.5 years, is that we've seen teams, both teams that we've invested in, but also teams that we've not invested in, but are friends of ours. We've seen teams work on a game for 11 months in a dingy office with rock bottom rent, doing, some contracting to be able to kind of, pay some meager salary to people that have, quit their jobs and kind of left for the dream of a startup. And in the end, this team that I'm referring to specifically managed to get funding. And I think a big part of the reason that they got funding was that the investors that they'd been talking to for such a long time were so impressed by their drive and the resilience. And I think that, we have invested in a team where we had been talking to the founder for 18 months. They had not gotten funding, but they'd continuing kind of, bootstrapping and working another job, and their team members working other jobs, continuing to make the game, continuing to demo it, continuing to get awards and recognitions. And, you could see the fire in their eyes every time you spoke to them, to the point where it was, well, if no one is going to give them money, we should just give them money. This game needs to be made. This team needs to do it. And, you then also see like way more savvy teams, perhaps teams that have done this before they have a startup or two in their kind of their experience, they approach it very, they're very savvy, they're very smart, they've identified the super high potential opportunity, they're doing everything right. That can be really impressive. We've invested in those types of teams, but that can also feel very sort of, you're building a startup predominantly because you want to be rich rather than you're building a startup and a company because you want to make something yourself. You want to build a company, but you also want to bring something amazing into the world. So I think that for us, it's trying to find the balance of how much you lean on your intuition versus how much you look at the trends out there and try to see, okay, is this something that's hitting the right market at the right quality at the right time? So I think we do a bit of both. I mean, I think some of our investments are more heart-led and some of our investments are more brain-led. And, we're a first-time fund. So, we are also a little bit of a startup, if you will. I mean, we share a lot of the journey of a startup. I mean, we also have to fundraise. And while we are getting very close to the end of our fundraising journey right now, it's been a long time in an environment that's been hostile, for a while. And we are learning as we go along. So our investment MO has also changed. It's not the same now as it was 3 years ago when we were starting out.
It's very humbling how you talk about it, which is, I think, first of all, transparent. And that's how founders can relate. It's like we talk the same language because many funds also are quite new, they're proving themselves. But I've seen different examples of it where, from the moment you have VC, it's like we are something already. And then we know. But in the end, many of us are here experimenting, learning, testing like a startup. And so it's very humbling to talk about it this way. But what is solid is your experience, how you support founders, the network. This is like very solid, right? But then how the future is going, we do a projection as we can. And the traits in founders is the most reliable factor you can have to see how they go about the journey. There's something about some teams, I've seen what you describe, is like creation is going through them, like nothing can stop them. It's like, fine, I'm not having external money, we'll make this happen. And they go on a Kickstarter, and I see over a month they have raised, sometimes 300K, 500,000, and they go far enough to go to that. And that is, for me, it goes beyond just the rational. But this is what is creation, the flow. And in the end, it's a very creative industry. It's not we make a balance sheet and then we say, okay, let's create that game that will return 100x. So I do see a bit of imbalance in that kind of investment where there's a lot of brain-led investment. It's about the balance, and time will tell, right? But the things that have moved my heart in the gaming industry were definitely not brain-led. And they became massive success because there's a soul in what you play, So this is that intangible things, that intuition, that touch you, and no one could say 10 years ago or 20 years ago that will work.
I was just talking to someone earlier today who's a very, very good friend of mine, and she recently took over as the managing director of Toca Boca, one of these amazing game franchises out of Stockholm. And I mean, I remember I spoke to a game producer from Toca Boca probably in 2014 or 15, because I mean, those were the Toca Boca is making a game that's called Toca World, which is like a creative dollhouse enjoyed, I think, predominantly by girls. I have two girls. Both of them have played this game, for many, many years. And just when COVID hit in 2020, Toca Boca released a game called Toca World, which absolutely exploded on TikTok. So they have hundreds of millions of players, and it's it's an open-ended game world where you're basically playing with digital toys. And I think that, if someone had pitched Toca to a VC back in 2015, they probably would have been very, very disinterested in it. And I think today, I mean, this is one of the, most successful game companies in Sweden. It's a very, very sort of new and different type of gaming experience that's now spawning a lot of clones and similar types of experiences. And I think that certainly, when it was initially made, it was made with the heart and the conviction that, kids deserved great games on these new touch devices. that, provided the type of open-ended gameplay that, Lego used to do back in the day. So definitely very heart-led, very value-driven, but has proven to be incredibly popular. And I think that, I'm hoping to be able to find those types of gems, games that really make an impact, but
Yeah.
games also that the creators can be so proud that they made them.
Yeah, and capture that. But that's also what you're building, with your network and drawing this type of founders, because the creative founders also, if they can, they would choose, right, who they are collaborating with. I have a last question. I'm curious about what it is, the everyday life, running a VC, especially with your game background. So things you'd like to share more on the joys of it, like your favorite part, and the parts that are more the challenges of the reality of the work.
As a gaming VC, I get to play a lot of games. And I enjoy that. I get to evaluate pitches and I spent a lot of time reviewing PowerPoint decks. I enjoy that. Part of the work that I, enjoy incredibly is the direct work with the founders in our portfolio, engaging with them, working, understanding their reality, figuring out where I can add value from my perspective, where I can pull in someone from my network to support, how I can sometimes take some of that load. And I think, going back to what you were saying, one thing that being, a AAA producer and leader of franchises of significant size has taught me. I mean, that was an incredibly stressful job oftentimes, but then it makes you appreciate what it's like to feel like you've got the whole world on your shoulders and that you carry a lot of responsibility, which I think that founders often feel. So I feel like, having that experience makes me able to appreciate that. The aspects that I enjoy perhaps less is the long form contract work, understanding like all of the different types of clauses that, you can put into a contract, particularly when you're bringing together different VC funds that are co-investing in the same round. That to me is, doesn't feel very creative, and it's very sort of detail oriented. So there's aspects of that is a challenge kind of picking up and learning. But then I think that, it's the meeting of the people and the evaluation of the games and the playing of the games and all of that I really enjoy. And the fact that, no 2 days are the same.
Yeah, sounds really exciting. It's like you created the world that first you want to see, as you said, but spending time, with founders and creators, you're doing this, to you with the work with Behold. What's in the plan for you this year? Things you'd like to share at last before we close the conversation today?
Well, I think that this year is because we're at the end of our fundraise, so we'll be more shifting our focus to kind of, building Behold's brand, focusing on our investments. I'm planning to be at a number of different events. I'm planning this year for the first time to go to some of the Asian events to understand more the reality of Japan and Korea. I am hoping to, participate in panels or speak at conferences and kind of, feel like I'm a part of the industry in a similar way. There's an aspect of being a developer that I really miss. And now kind of as we shift from fundraising to more investing, I want to be kind of more engaged in the community, if you will. So that's what I'm looking forward to doing this year.
Yeah. So for the listeners, well, now you have a sense of what Behold is standing for, and you have here Lína. I'll also share the details in the show notes, and you know where she will be. So, come and say hi.
This has been a really enjoyable conversation, Sophie, and thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show.
Yeah, thank you for being, there and you. But again, like I said at the beginning of a conversation, I trusted that you'll be just you. And I think that's what I've enjoyed so much of conversation, even when in a past, not so far ago, for long ago, from a life of fundraising, I really appreciate it. And part of me, like, I really want to work with Lína. But this is a way to connect today. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. We keep growing our community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. And if you want to accelerate your growth, I offer creative leadership coaching and workshop, plus other free resources that you can find on riseandplay.io. I can't wait to connect with you. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time,